Hi everybody, I hope that you're all doing well. It's actually been about a week since I stood in front of a camera and properly filmed. I think the last video that you will have seen would have been my beautiful books video, so obviously I wasn't in front of the camera then. Prior to that it had just been my reading vlog, so I just had like little snippets of me getting the camera out. But yeah, it's been a whole week since I've done the proper stand and talk thing, so I feel a bit out of practice actually. I thought that I would ease myself in by doing a tag video, and I was watching one of Jen Campbell's videos the other day, one of her newer videos, and then I let YouTube do its thing and it auto-played a video from 5 years ago, which was her original time and place book tag. This is a really simple concept for a tag where you basically take 10 books which you have specific memories linking to the time and place that you read them. It's a really lovely idea for a tag in my opinion, because there are some books that just have specific memories tied up to them and they just stick in your head for no other reason but the time and place that you read them. So this tag is really honouring that relationship with books and is a nice opportunity to talk about books that you might not necessarily have spoken about otherwise. To kickstart things off and make things a little bit topical, I thought I would go for the last book that I read prior to us going into lockdown, which was Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine Evaristo. Yeah, it was a really weird situation where I was on the bus to work. There had been no restrictions put in place yet of how much space you must leave between people, whether or not you should wear a mask on public transport, but everybody was kind of side-eyeing each other. Like every single time somebody sniffled or coughed, there was just a and yeah, it was just a bit of a tense bus ride while reading this book. And I feel like this will just stick in my head as the pre-lockdown book for me. Following swiftly on from that, the first book that I read whilst we were in lockdown was Anne Boleyn, Henry VIII's Obsession by Elizabeth Norton. This was a birthday gift from my sister. So we went into lockdown on the 23rd of March, but my birthday was on the 21st. And we had these grand plans of going down to London, seeing a couple of shows. We were going to go to the Harry Potter studios. It was going to be a grand old time. And obviously everything in the week prior to lockdown being officially announced got cancelled. So we didn't end up going to London. I'd also been made redundant from my workplace a couple of days before lockdown. So we were all just in a very weird headspace where we didn't know what was happening and I was just feeling a bit uneasy. And there was a good week or two there between Girl, Woman, Other and this book where I just didn't read anything because I was just really anxious and stressed. However, I did eventually come around to reading again, and this was one of my birthday books from my sister, and I thought, yeah, it's a nice little short thing. It's about Anne Boleyn, which obviously is somebody that I love in history. So it was like a nice way of getting myself back into reading in this really weird, chaotic time. I feel like I could fill a whole video of books just under the category books that I've read on trips to London. I don't know why, but like the books that I read on my trips from Leeds to London always just stick very firmly in my mind in a way that no other books that I read on trips really do. But I don't have a whole host of them, I just have a couple of those books here today, and one of them is When Breath Becomes Air by Kalanithi. I think I've mentioned a few times before, specifically remembering that I read this on the tube and was crying at the end. This I read I think back in 2017, and I was doing a work experience placement at Sky. They have their headquarters in Osterley, which is like zone 4. It's around about Hounslow area. And yeah, I was just on the tube to Osterley reading the end of this book and just weeping on the tube in broad daylight in front of everybody. And yeah, I don't tend to get very openly emotional about books, so this really did stick in my mind as a first for me. This is the memoir of Paul Kalanithi, who was training to be a neurosurgeon until very soon before he's able to qualify, he finds out that he has inoperable lung cancer. This is him really recounting his past and his journey into being a neurosurgeon and his experience having to be on the other side of the doctor-patient scenario. And yeah, it's absolutely devastating and heartbreaking to read. Another book that I have very specific London memories of is Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Reni Eddo-Lodge. I read this back in 2018 and it was on a trip down to London where I was interviewing for a job at a publishing house. Obviously I didn't get it, but I remember reading this on the train there, and then I stayed over at my friend's house. She drove me to the tube station just before my interview, and I remember hearing on the radio them talking about how next week was going to be the 25th anniversary of Stephen Lawrence's murder. And I remember thinking, oh, that's so weird because I just read about Stephen Lawrence in this book. Whilst I was reading it, I just hadn't registered that the dates matched up, and I just thought it was so weird that I had just been reading about this and here it was on the radio. And I also just have a very strong memory of I'd done my interview and then I ran into central London, went to a Bella Italia because my parents are great. Whenever I go to London, they always use their Tesco Club Card vouchers to get me food vouchers for different restaurants. They're lovely. I highly recommend doing that if you are wanting to get some free meals in London. But yeah, I just ran into the Bella Italia on Shaftesbury Avenue. It's the one that's right near Les Mis because that area of London is my happy place. Crashed on a table, got my bowl of pasta and then got my book out, and then there was a girl next to me who was just kind of looking at me, and then she goes, "Excuse me," and then I look at her and she says, "I'm reading this too," and it was just such a lovely moment where this was a complete stranger, but we were having a conversation about this book and how much we were enjoying it and how much history that we'd never been taught that we were learning from this book, and it was just a really lovely moment. And I think it just really kind of landed for me how much of an impact this book was having on people, especially young people. I don't know, that will just always stick in my head. Next up, I have Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins, which is of course the second book in the Hunger Games trilogy. I remember I read the first Hunger Games book, I think like March 2012, which was around about the time that the first film was being released. And I remember I put off reading the rest of the books in the trilogy for months and months because I felt like the first Hunger Games book just felt very complete in itself. I don't know how anybody else felt, but I felt like everything had wrapped up. Like there were some plot points that you could go on to, but I didn't feel like I needed it. But you know, of course, eventually I did pick up the second and the third books, and I found that once I finished the second book especially, I had to race to pick up the next one because I feel like this is just a precursor to the third book. But anyway, in terms of the time and place I read this coming back from an offers day at a university. So it was around about the time where I'd applied to UCAS, to universities. I'd put in my 5 options. I'd applied to St Andrews, York, Lancaster, Chester and Leicester, and Chester and Leicester were meant to be my backups, but I never actually went on the open days to either Leicester or Chester. I just put them in because other people said that they were very good universities. I got told that they would be very good backup universities if results day didn't go the way that I wanted to, so I just put them on because other people said they were nice. And I can't remember if it was Chester or Leicester. I think it was Chester University that I went on the offers day to, and I immediately stepped out onto the car park and I was like, no, I am not going here. And like, I couldn't explain to my mum, and I could not explain to you now what feeling I had where I just got out and was like, no, I'm not going here. But I had the similar experience in reverse with St Andrews and with York, where immediately I got out and I was like, I want to go to this university so badly. It was just this really weird sensation where I just instantly knew, no, I cannot put this down as an insurance university. I don't want to go here. No offence to anybody who went to Leicester or Chester, they were just not the universities for me. But Leicester I'd had kind of meh feelings about when I'd gone on the full offers day, but Chester, like, I pretty much just made it an hour. I went to the welcome talk and then I just turned to my mum and said, there's no point me going to the rest of the day because I don't want to go here. So we were just driving home at like 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and we booked my whole day off of school, and I was just feeling really bad because I knew I'd applied to the wrong places. And yeah, I just kind of held on to this book and was reading it for a bit of comfort, which it just seems like such an odd book to have as a comfort blanket, The Hunger Games. But I think just the familiarity of this world just really helped me that day. I don't know, my brain is just very, very odd. Next up we have Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children by Ransom Riggs, which I can't even really remember the plot much of. I know that it's all based around these like creepy photos of creepy children, and it's like there's some sort of time loop where this boy is able to enter into the world where these children live. I can't remember this book, and it's such a popular series of books and I only read the first one. But no, my memory of this, I used to work behind the bar at a golf club for a few years, and I remember my first manager at that job knew that I was a big reader, and she basically said to me, look, you know, the thing about working in a bar is that there are some days where it is absolutely rammed, where you will be run off your feet, you will not know what has hit you. But then there are other days in a golf club where, you know, people are out golfing and you won't see anybody for hours. And as long as like the bar is tidy, you've done all of like the essential like maintenance jobs, I don't really care if you read on the bar. I don't mind. And yeah, the summers that I worked behind the bar, I ended up getting a lot of reading done because whenever it was quiet, I'd get all my jobs done and then I'd kind of sit up on the bar reading a book. And it was a glorious time. And this is one of the books that I remember reading in the first summer that I worked there. To be honest with you, it has not left much more of an impression on me aside from the fact that I read it on the bar. But you know, ooh, creepy children, ooh. Another book from around about the same time is Why We Broke Up by Daniel Handler, with illustrations by Myra Kalman. And this was a book that I remember reading in my first year of university. This was first year of my undergraduate history degree, and I remember my first year was not the best time for me. I'd weirdly managed to hold off feeling homesick through most of the first term, and then all of the homesickness kind of hit me in my spring and summer terms. And I remember the spring term of university, first year, I went back home about like half of the weekends. The thing about history degrees is you spend a very small amount of time with lecturers. I think for my first year, the most I spent in a class per week was 6 hours. So yeah, 6 hours total of lectures and seminars, and the rest of the time you were meant to be doing work yourself. And I didn't work during my first year of uni either. So I was in this kind of unique situation where Thursday noon until Monday, like 11 o'clock in the morning, I had nothing that I had to be at university for. So like 5 of the 10 weekends that I was meant to be at university, I just went home because I needed to go home. And I think it was the first weekend that I did come home that I had just ordered this book, and it arrived just before I was about to set off home. I get home and I was talking to my mum, and there was a power cut that day. And I just have very strong memories of like sat with my mum in the front room where the only light was, just reading this book as she did the crossword. And I just felt very oddly comforted to be sat in a completely dark room aside from this one window reading this book with my mum on the other side of the table. It was just very nice for a weird situation. We have a children's one, which is Clarice Bean Spells Trouble by Lauren Child. I was a big fan of the Clarice Bean books when I was younger, and in fact my one and only like thing that I've gotten from an author came from Lauren Child. She actually wrote a postcard to me, and I think I did have a letter from her at one point because I used to write to her. So it doesn't matter how old I get, I feel like I'm always going to hold on to these original copies. But I feel like this is the one that I have the strongest memories for because I used to spend most of my Easters at my nana and granddad's house. I think it was probably because my parents were working during like the Easter holidays, so my parents would just be like, all right, off for a week with your grandparents you go. Yeah, I'm really hoping it was that my parents were just at work and that I wasn't an abysmal 7 to 9 year old to have to look after. I just remember I felt really about having to stay at my grandparents, you know, because I was just such a fantastic 8-year-old who was very unappreciative of their grandparents. But I remember my mum was like, it's gonna be okay, I've bought you a book, and she gave this to me, which was the second book in the Clarice Bean novels, and I remember just being so excited and feeling like it was just such a massive book for little 8-year-old me to read, because like, I don't know, I'm quite impressed with 8-year-old me. You know, that for me at 8 years old was quite small writing, in 190 pages, which for me at age 8 was a lot of pages to read on my own. I felt so accomplished reading this. So yeah, that's the main memory of this book for me, is reading it at my grandparents' house at Easter and being a grumpy 8-year-old. Getting into the last couple of books, we've got a couple which are once again from that first year of university, because that was quite a formative year for reading for me, because I went through like a 4-year period between doing my GCSEs and my A-levels where I barely read anything that wasn't for school. It was basically the biggest reading slump of my life. It was a 4-year reading slump where I barely read anything. But I always knew that I wanted to get back into reading because I'd been a very big reader as a child. I knew exactly what I was missing. I feel like a lot of the motivation behind that big push actually came in 2013 when I read The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. I'd remembered that quite a few people were reading this back in sixth form, just around about the time that we were finishing our A-levels, and it was a book that I'd always wanted to get to. And I remember my experience of reading this was during my very first showcase with the Musical Theatre Society at my university. I remember being backstage because I hadn't quite properly made friends with people yet, and I was still a little bit anxious of talking to people. So I just curled up with this book and was like, no one talk to me, I'm so weird. They probably thought I was very strange just backstage with this book not talking to anybody, but it's fine. I made friends with all of them eventually. But this book just really reminded me of how much I do really enjoy reading and how sucked into reading I really get. So this was the book that was the big push for me to get back into reading. And then at the beginning of 2014, like I say, I made it my goal to read more. It was my big New Year's resolution for 2014 was I will read more. I will be a person who reads. That was the year that I discovered Goodreads, and I set my Goodreads goal at 30 books because in the previous year I think I'd read about 11 books, and I felt really bad about that because I was like, I can't even read a book a month. What am I doing? So I set my goal at 30 books because I thought, you know, that's more than double what I read last year, and it might be a little bit of a push to get to that 30 books. Amazingly to me, I actually hit the goal of 30 in April that year, and I think I went on to read something like 79, 80 books in 2014, and I was just blown away that I was able to hit that milestone. I think technically the first books that I logged on Goodreads that year were the Caroline Duffy Christmas poems that I have like hiding over there somewhere, but the first full-length novel that I read was The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. I still count this as one of my favourite books of all time because I do truly believe that this was the book that really got me back into reading and really cemented for me how important reading is, and also being able to read whatever you want, having that freedom and that luxury to read whatever you want. I feel like it's become a little bit of a thing on BookTube to really like downgrade this book and say that it's not as good, it's overhyped, it's overrated, and I always get very offended whenever I see people saying that because this just has such a special place in my heart. I think it checks a lot of boxes for me. It's a book that is all about the joy of reading and the importance of reading and how reading can be this big bonding and educational thing. It's set during World War II in Nazi Germany, and like as a teenager especially, I was so fascinated by Nazi Germany and the experience of being a German during World War II. So that was another checkbox that it hit for me, and it's a book that is told from the perspective of death, and I don't know why I have a morbid curiosity with like the personification of death, but once again, it was here, and this was probably like my first exposure to death as a character, and it came just at the perfect time. So like I say, it just is a book that has a lot of my favourite elements in it, so I feel like I was always going to love this. And this is a book I really want to reread at some point because I always say, for a very long time I said that this was my favourite book of all time, but because it's been a good 6 years since I last read it, I don't know if that is the case, but eventually I do want to get around to rereading this. I'm just scared that I'm not going to love it as much. But I think even if I do reread it eventually, and it isn't the fantastic book that I hyped it up to be all those years ago, it will still have that special place in my heart because of the time and the place that I read it, because this was the book that got me back into reading, and arguably without this book I wouldn't be doing my channel today. Oh, soppy ending for you. But yes, those were all 10 books in the time and place book tag that I wanted to talk to you about today. I will leave below the people that I want to tag to do this video, but feel free to do it even if I don't tag you. I'd love to hear your answers for this, and it would be really fun to kind of get this tag back up and running because I feel like I've not seen people do it for a very long time. What are some books that hold a very specific memory of time and place for you? I'd love to hear from you. I hope you are having a fantastic, fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.